All right. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Our webinar today will focus on customizing and implementing visual schedules. I'm Mandi Rickelman.
I'm Fredman.
And welcome. So we are presenting to you today from the Monarch Center for Autism in Shaker Heights, Ohio. And these are just a list of services that we provide. I'll just give you a quick overview. We have a preschool program, half-day and full-day options. It's 5 days a week and it goes 11 months. We have a transitional education program for the adults with autism, a boarding academy, adult autism program and residence. We offer extended school year. We have a summer social language program, and we provide family training, support, social activities, and we also have an online resource center. If you have questions about the programs that we offer, our contact information will be posted at the end of this presentation. Feel free to contact us. So today you'll learn why our visual is so important, how to customize your visual schedules, and how to implement your visual schedules.
Before we begin actually talking, we want to ask a few questions. We're going to send them one at a time. You'll be able to answer on your screen. So first, we'd just like to know a little bit about you and where everyone is coming from, what your past experience is. So we'd like to first know what grade level you teach. You can go ahead and answer now. We'll give everyone a few seconds to respond. Looks like we so far have a lot of pre-K and first through third grade. Okay. All right, and as well as some middle school and a fair number of high school people who work with high schoolers also. So we've got people, it sounds like we have participants from all over the age range, which is good, and we will touch on how to use visual schedules that may be relevant to all of those different ages. You can close the voting.
Great.
We'd also just like to know what your position is. And it looks like, okay, a lot of speech pathologists, special education generalists. Okay, so a little bit of everything. Also some intervention specialists, educators, and OTs. That's great. So you'll be able to hopefully incorporate the information from today's webinar into the work that you do in whatever capacity you're working with your students. Okay. And then lastly, we want to know about your experience with visual schedules. How new are you to this idea? How familiar are you with customizing and implementing visual schedules? So go ahead and answer that. And it looks as though a lot of people have some experience with schedules, maybe have used them a few times, some people who use them regularly, and then also a fair number who have experience with creating and customizing schedules, and then a few who are brand new to this. So we will hopefully be providing helpful information to all of you based on what your past experience is. All right. With that, we will go ahead and get started. If you take a look at this schedule here, this may look familiar to some of you. It's a basic, probably school day schedule, maybe half of a school day for a student. And something that we want to point out at the very beginning is that not all schedules are created equal. This kind of visual schedule may work really well for some students, but it won't work for others. And visual schedules are not one size fits all. What we're going to talk about today is explore how we can adapt a schedule and really customize it to make it more effective and more beneficial for an individual student.
Why are visuals so important? The research indicates that individuals with autism spectrum disorders are driven visually. Their dominant visual processing mode, or their dominant mode of processing, is visual processing. They understand visual language. So when we're looking at why we present information visually, we're capitalizing on the child or the individual's strength, which is visual processing. They demonstrate a specific attraction to the visual-oriented material. So we see individuals who are attracted to the screen media, computer programs, tablets, and they benefit from the use of visual content to enhance their communication, organize their daily activities, and improve overall academic performance.
So what is a visual schedule exactly? Before we answer this question, I want everybody to just think about your own calendar or organizer. Maybe it's on your phone or a computer program. Maybe you have an old-fashioned date book like I do. And then think about how you feel when you get somewhere and you realize that you left it at home. Maybe anxious, maybe unsettled, you can't remember what you're supposed to do today, where you're expected to be, what's supposed to happen. And that is how a lot of our kids on the autism spectrum feel when they don't have a schedule that they can understand. A customized visual schedule is a remedy to that feeling, that anxiety, and that problem. So a visual schedule is a tool that we use to organize events when the information is given in a visual way, as Mandi said, in a way that is easiest for our students to understand. It's especially important for kids who have a hard time understanding and processing that verbal spoken language, which is a lot of kids on the autism spectrum. They just have a hard time with that spoken language piece. And so a visual schedule presents that in another modality. A visual schedule can give information such as what's happening today in terms of regular daily activities. It can also alert students to a change in the daily routine. It also gives information about the sequence of events and then tells about transitions, so they know when to expect when something is going to end and what's going to follow it. And for example, you can see these are a lot of different examples of what a visual schedule may look like. There's a lot of different kinds. A visual schedule does not have just one face. And so we're going to get into the different components that we should consider when we talk about customizing a visual schedule. Broadly, we talk about two different kinds of schedules. We talk about macro schedules and micro schedules. A macro schedule organizes the events of a larger chunk of time. So generally, it's a daily schedule or maybe a morning or afternoon schedule. A micro schedule on the other hand, organizes, breaks down the smaller steps of a sequence. So for example, here you see a micro schedule for a hand washing routine. This schedule in particular uses photographs that depict each individual step of that simple routine of washing hands. So this is one example of a micro schedule.
In a moment, we're going to show you some examples of students using visual schedules. We'll show you an example of a macro schedule. A student is following the daily activities of the school day. The second student is following a micro schedule. So it's the student's lunch routine, and that routine is broken down into steps. How does he heat up his lunch? And then an example of the electronic visual schedule. I think there was someone who posted a question about serving older individuals with autism, and this electronic visual might speak to you. It's using an app called Autismate. So we'll go to the videos. Is it buffered? Okay.
Oh.
Nice job getting your lunchbox.
That's putting food on plate. Nice job. That's putting food in the microwave. Woohoo! You programmed the microwave. Time to wait.
Check the dryer. Take out the clean clothes. Check the washer. Put the clothes in the washer into the dryer. Put your dirty clothes in the washer. Start the washer. Press the button for soap.
Okay, so we hope that you found those examples to be helpful. There was one question for children who are severely impaired and aren't pairing the picture yet to the action, and there we would probably recommend starting at the object level. Anna will get into visual representation. But when we're thinking about objects, so with your student, if it makes sense, whatever activity they're going to, say they're going to OT, giving them a peg and taking that peg to OT and then putting that peg into a peg box so they can start associating that that peg means go to OT, or taking a paintbrush to the art room and then swiping paint on an easel, taking their fork with them to their meal, or taking a roll of toilet paper or a pull-up to the bathroom. So an object that they're going to use for that activity.
Several people have also asked what that app was. That app is called Autismate, and it is listed at the end of the presentation. It is not, and many people have noted that they recognize the sound from Vizzle. It is not specifically a Vizzle app, but yes, it does share that Vizzle sound.
So you'll see those examples created independence for the students. They were able to use the visuals and independently heat up their own lunch. So creates independence and understanding of information. So we'll move forward. So the benefits of using visual schedules, what do they accomplish? Using visual schedules helps individuals organize and understand their daily events or routines and prepares them for deviations in a routine. The daily routines, when you use a visual schedule, or when a visual schedule is provided during the daily routine, we see reduction in anxiety, because we're providing a structure that allows the child to anticipate what will happen next. Visual schedules improve understanding and cooperation because the visuals match the child's processing skills. When a child understands the information that's presented to them, then we see an increase in participation and greater independence. Visual schedules reduce the need for repetitive verbal prompting. Well, first off, we have to think about overwhelming a student with too many verbals. It can be difficult for them to process too much verbal information. So when we provide the visual information, it's again speaking to their processing level, and then also just taking us out of the equation. Visual schedules support transition between activities or locations. By providing the necessary information, the child can understand. And then the visual schedules also prepare the student for unexpected events because the structure is already in place. If a child is accustomed to using a visual schedule, then when something unexpected occurs, there's already the structure in place to notify the child of the change in a context and in a language in which the child understands.
So visual schedules then also become really crucial and a very useful tool when it comes to changes. A lot of our kids learn and get very comfortable with routines, and then when something changes, it throws them off. Being able to present a change on a visual schedule goes a long way. It can really help reduce anxiety. These deviations often are anxiety producing for kids on the autism spectrum, and being able to present it on a visual schedule is a way to help reduce that. It also helps anticipate and prepare for the change so that it doesn't catch a student off guard. It improves understanding and therefore cooperation, because if a student understands what's going on, he or she is less likely to have behavioral issues surrounding a change in the schedule. It also helps to communicate what is to be expected during an activity. So that might be helpful in terms of a micro schedule, which is breaking down the smaller steps of the routine or of the change in routine. For example, if you're at a school and there's a fire drill coming up, it might be very helpful to have a micro schedule of what's going to happen during the fire drill. We'll hear a ring, or we'll hear a loud bell. We'll line up. We'll go outside. We'll wait for our teacher to tell us to go back in. We'll go back inside, and then I'll get the computer. Something such as that. So the student understands, the sequence of what's going to happen during the change, and also understands that it's not going to last forever. This fire drill won't last forever. After I wait outside and then my teacher tells me we can go back inside, then I'm going to go back inside and I'll get the computer afterwards, which is the last point that you see here, that it communicates what's going to happen after the change, and especially if that is something motivating, that can go a long way in increasing cooperation. Just to give an anecdotal example, we had a student, an example of what really a profound impact can be made by even using just a simple visual schedule to help a child prepare for a change in routine. We had a preschool student who had to go to the doctor before school started one day. This happened, the first time that this happened, there was no visual schedule in place at home. So the child went in the car with his mom, went to the doctor, and then got back in the car with his mom, and had no expectation that he was going to have to come to school afterwards. He figured that was my outing for the day. Now I'm going back in the car with mom and we're going home. When he pulled up at school, he had a major behavioral issue. He had a very difficult time even just getting into the school building because it was so unexpected. He didn't know that that was the expectation, and the rest of his day was fairly unproductive because he was so upset by this change in his routine. The next time that he had a doctor's appointment before school, we provided his mom with a very simple visual schedule. It was 3 pictures, one on top of the other. A picture of mom, a picture of the doctor's office, and a picture of school. She presented it to him at the beginning of when he woke up in the morning, and he was therefore able to understand, first I'm going to go in the car with mom, then I'm going to go to the doctor, and after that I'm going to go to school. Because he had that expectation, when he pulled up at the school building that day, he was ready. He came in and he had a fantastic day. So it's really a great example of just what a very simple visual schedule, 3 pictures, can make in reducing that anxiety and increasing understanding and cooperation. Here you can see a couple examples of what a visual schedule might look like for a change in routine. On top you'll see a macro schedule. This would be for going to the doctor, for example, and this would be for a student who's using pictures, photographs on a visual schedule. So it depicts first going in the car, then a picture of the doctor's office, then maybe McDonald's or something highly motivating to help get through the doctor's office, and then a picture of school, so the child understands what to expect. And then at the bottom, you'll see an example of a micro schedule, for example, for getting a shot. And a student can review this ahead of time so that he or she knows what steps are going to happen at the doctor. I'll see the nurse, I'll pull up my sleeve, feel something around my arm, get a pinch, a Band-Aid, and then a special or some sort of reinforcing or motivating activity at the end. And again, these are just examples of what a visual schedule for these things might look like, and when we get into customization, you'll see how you might change these depending on your students or your child's needs.
So how do we know when visual schedules are necessary? Here are some questions that we ask. Does your child have a hard time transitioning between activities? Does your child demonstrate challenging behavior during transitions? Does your child have a hard time learning sequences? Difficulty understanding expectations, difficulty with new environments, hard time with change in routines. I'm sure we've all seen the kids, they typically go to the pool or they typically have outdoor recess, and today it's raining, so they can't go. Difficulty in adjusting to that change in routine. So we'll get into slides later on about how do you prepare systematically children for those change in routines. A hard time learning sequences. So when something is presented visually, it's there, the child can always look back to it. So with autism, the students have trouble with recall, retrieval, and when something is there visually, it's there permanently and they can reference it at any time. Difficulty understanding the expectations. So, a lot of anxiety comes with, how long am I going to be in this location? What's going to happen to me here? Who am I going to be with? And so when we are able to represent those expectations visually, it just takes the students down a level, and we'll see a decrease in those challenging behaviors because the expectation is there. And then as they become accustomed to the visual schedule protocol, it gets easier and easier as they go. So if you answered yes to any of these questions, then your child would likely benefit from visual schedules.
So now we're going to get into the question of customization, taking a visual schedule one step further. As we mentioned earlier, visual schedules are not one size fits all, and we're going to get into the question of which type of visual schedule will work the best and make the most sense for each individual student. Often when we hear that people are using or trying to use visual schedules with a student but it's not working, a lot of times it's because of one of the following reasons. Maybe the schedule is not accessible. Sometimes you'll see in a classroom there may be a daily schedule for the class and it's posted high up over a blackboard or high up on a wall that's not at children's eye level. That sort of schedule isn't accessible to kids because they can't see it and it's not in their fields of vision. Another issue may be if a family is trying to use a visual schedule at home but they're using it inconsistently and don't always keep it in the same place. A student may not be able to find it or refer to it in a time of anxiety. I was working with a student just yesterday who was starting to demonstrate some anxiety, and he independently went to his schedule, looked to see what was coming until it was time for him to go home, and then was able to settle down. He was able to do that independently because the schedule was in a place where he was able to access it and knew exactly where to find it. It wasn't a time where a teacher would have presented a schedule to him, but it was a time where he started feeling that anxiety, and because the schedule was so accessible, he was able to find it, calm himself down, and finish the rest of his day. Another issue is sometimes that the schedule's not meaningful. If we're using pictures, icons that the student doesn't understand to represent an activity, then our schedule is not going to be effective because it doesn't make sense. It's not in a language that our child can understand. And then a last issue is that maybe the schedule's not motivating. Some kids are automatically drawn to these schedules. They settle them down and they gravitate towards them. But other kids, it's not such a natural fit at the beginning and they need to sort of be hooked in. Something has to make them interested in the visual schedule. All of these things we can remedy by customizing a schedule appropriately. We're going to go through 3 different steps for creating a customized visual schedule. The first one is determining what type of schedule the child will respond to best, then breaking down the routine into smaller steps, and then representing each step visually. And before we start getting into these steps, I want everyone to just think about one time of day or one routine that is very difficult for your students or your children or a student of yours in particular. Maybe it's the child has a hard time getting ready in the morning, that process of getting out of bed through the morning routine and getting to school. Maybe at school it's the lunchtime cleanup routine that is really challenging for a student. So whatever that difficult schedule or routine is, keep that in mind as we go through these steps and think about how you might be able to apply them to that particular routine. All right, we're going to spend the most time on this first step, determining what type of schedule your child will respond to best. We'll go through each of these steps in detail, but just briefly, we'll talk about visual representation level, about formatting the schedule, about sizing and color coding for schedules, about adding motivational components, and including additional information like duration or other factors. And we will go through some examples of what each of these might look like. So our first item to consider is visual representation level. That's a term that we use to indicate the type of visual that a child understands to represent or to stand for something else. It's the type of visual that a child can make that connection with. So one child might understand that a drawing can be used to represent an actual activity or an actual thing, but another child may not make that connection. So we need to think about which type of visual will be meaningful to that child and help that child make the connection. So we begin with objects, which is the most basic visual representation level. It's something that Mandi spoke to earlier to answer a question from a participant about kids who are not even able to really focus on a visual on a schedule. An object schedule, or an object student who's functioning at a visual representation level with objects may be able to understand that a fork represents lunchtime, and when it's time for lunchtime, that child may have a fork posted on their schedule and be able to take a fork and understand that that fork represents the fork that I'm going to use for my lunchtime. We move down then to 3D representations and then to photographs. And the last 3 are illustrated here on your slide. So you'll see here, as an example, we depicted the concept apple at several different visual representation levels. So you see that the one on the top looks exactly like an apple. It very closely resembles an actual apple. And some students are able to understand that, but are not able to go any further. The next type of visual representation level is color line drawings. So you see to the right of that actual photograph is a colored icon of an apple. It doesn't look exactly like that apple, but it represents the same apple that the photograph represents. Some students then are able to move to black and white line drawings and are able to understand, as you see on the second line, that icon, that very simple line drawing, represents an actual apple. And then lastly, some students do well with text. Just a note about text. We want to be sure for our kids who are reading that we're not necessarily assuming that because they're able to decode and read the text that it necessarily means that they're comprehending it and that they're understanding it. So for example, just because a student can read on a schedule, get shoes, get coat, get backpack, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily making that connection that means that actually means I should put on my coat and my backpack and my shoes. And so we want to make sure that we're not making that assumption. We'll get those lights on in just a minute. We want to make sure that we're not making that assumption, and so a lot of times what we'll do is that we'll pair text with a simple visual, as you can see in this example right here. And it's just, we want to really stress the importance of figuring out what visual representation level is going to make sense for your student. We need to use a language that they're going to understand, and if they don't understand that an icon that represents lunch means lunchtime, the schedule is going to be meaningless to them. So another example is that, you know, if we're talking about a bedtime routine schedule for a child and it ends with a child's, you know, special teddy bear that they're going to get at the end of the bedtime routine, some children might be able to understand that if there's a generic icon of a teddy bear at the end of the schedule, that represents their own teddy bear and that will be meaningful to them. But other students may not understand that, and if they see a generic picture of a teddy bear at the end, it's not motivating, it's not meaningful to them. They need an actual photograph of their special teddy bear to understand that that's what's coming at the end of the schedule. So this is something we always want to keep in mind when we start putting together a schedule for our children.
And just really quickly to address the object question. So what to do when the child's at the object level. It's best to use an object that they're going to use as soon as they get to their destination. So you know, again, referring back to the PEG for OT, if it's a PEG and then the child, and if they need assistance, then the aide or the teacher or the therapist walks with the student hand over hand behind them, walks to OT, and the best scenario would be that the PEG board would be sitting on the table where that student is going to sit, and the student puts the PEG into the PEG board. That's just the first thing that they always do, and then they do the PEG routine. So it's just best to make a connection with an object that the child's actually going to use versus matching, and you can get to that would be the next steps, matching or putting in a location. But functionally, it gives them a purpose for that object. So I hope that answered your question.
Okay. The second issue that we want to take into account is the format of the schedule. And as you've seen from a lot of our examples, there are many different formats that a visual schedule can take on. Mandi will discuss this more when we talk about implementation, but just to give you a few examples, we may format a schedule horizontally or vertically, depending on the child's needs, or we may use an electronic device, as you saw in the one video example. We also will have to think about how the child is going to interact with the schedule. So for example, are they going to check off each item when they finish it, or would a student do better actually manipulating the icons? So maybe you'll mount each schedule icon on Velcro, and then the child will take it off or flip it over when they finish each item on the schedule. Those are things to think about, and again, Mandi will get into that in a little bit more detail later. We also want to think about sizing and coloring and how we may add those as extra elements to our schedule to make it more useful to a child. Sometimes we see that a parent or a teacher is trying to use a visual schedule with a child, and the icons are so small that they're not even visually salient to the child. The child either isn't even looking at them or isn't able to process them because they're so small. So you can see here the difference that it would make, even just to make a picture larger for a student to use. You know, a 1x1 little square may not be big enough. A child may need a 3x3 square in order for them to really attend to it and process the visual that's there. You can also see in the third sort of depiction here that for a child who is still working on visual discrimination, it may help to put a bold outline outside each item on the schedule, just to help them discriminate between the separate steps of the schedule. And then we also see that if we have a student who maybe isn't even attending to a schedule, sometimes adding color will help just to draw their attention. So those are all some examples of different ways you can play with size and color to make the schedule more meaningful. We also talked briefly about motivational components. So if you take a look at the schedule on the left of the screen, this is maybe a 3-step schedule for a bedtime routine: going to the bathroom, brushing teeth, and putting on pajamas. That simple schedule on the left may work. That may work well for some kids, but other kids are going to think that's boring and have no interest in looking at it. So to the right, you see an example of how you might enhance that schedule for maybe a student who loves Minnie Mouse. So at the end of every step, they're getting to put a check next to Minnie Mouse. And the color and the enhancement sometimes can be useful just in hooking a child in and making the schedule more motivating, so that they're willing to learn to use it. We also may want to consider adding time or duration information to a schedule. So here, for those of you who are working with older students, this might be a schedule that you would use for an older student, maybe for leisure time after school, something like that, or if there's free time during their school day, during their schedule. You can see here that the squares in blue depict the actual events that are going to happen: music, magazine, computer, get a snack. And then underneath, the white boxes give quantitative information about how many, how long, how much. So for some kids, they're going to see a schedule with just the information on the top, and they're not going to understand, well, how long do I listen to music for? How long should I look at the magazine or use the computer? And so adding duration information or quantitative information can help with that. They can see, oh, I listened to 3 songs, maybe even have a spot for them to check off, I've listened to 3 songs. Then I look at a magazine for 15 minutes. I use the computer 15 minutes, and then I get a snack. How many snacks do I get? Oh, I get 1. And then we can also lastly just talk about adding even more layers onto a visual schedule. So this example is for a schedule for trick-or-treating. You can see in the column, the green column that says what, that's the information that would be on a more basic schedule. Those are the steps of what happens. And then there's a lot of other layers that are added onto it. So this schedule gives information about how long I do this for, who's going to be with me, where will it be, what will happen as a reward afterwards. This kind of schedule may be very overwhelming to some kids, and this is not an appropriate schedule for kids who need a more basic level. But for students who get who need more information, or who maybe just knowing what is going to happen isn't enough to reduce that anxiety, they also need to know how long and who and where. This is just an example of more layers you can add on to a visual schedule to customize them and fit a child's needs. The second step, after you've decided what type of visual schedule will be best, is to think about the routine and break it down into smaller steps. So think about the routine that you picked at the beginning when we were talking about this, and what are the smaller steps that the student needs to go through in order to finish the schedule. And some students may do better with fewer, more general steps. Other kids may need everything broken down into each tiny specific part. So here's an example of 5 steps for a bedtime routine. And then lastly, you need to represent each step visually. So this is just obviously one example of what a visual representation might look like for the steps of the bedtime routine. But again, you're going to have to think about all those factors you took into account, visual representation level and size and colors, in order to make this schedule work for other students. So for one student, this may have photographs of their actual bath and their actual toothbrush and pajamas. It's going to depend on what your student needs. So going through these steps is going to help you to customize a schedule that's going to make the most sense and be the most effective for an individual child. And now we just have to talk about how do we use it.
So to recap, we went over the importance of visual schedules, the benefits, how to customize, and now we'll look at how do we teach our students how to interact with these schedules. So when we're introducing a visual schedule to a child for the first time, it's best to break the skill down into small steps. Initially, you'll want to teach that individual that a picture is representative of a destination. So for example, pairing the picture of a computer, handing the child the picture of the computer and then walking with them to the computer. but I'll talk with you here about the steps of introducing that visual. So you stand with the student, you provide the visual information, for example, the computer, and then use simple, relevant information. So computer time, time for computer, go to computer. You don't want to get wordy with your direction. Come on, Tommy, it's time for computer time or story time. You want to keep it simple and pair the language with the visual, because what you want to do is map that language for the child, map the verbal language onto the visual language, or vice versa, excuse me. So you have your visual, you have your child, and then you walk with them to that destination. You want to assist them in getting to the correct destination with that picture. And then again, when you get to that designation, you will say computer, computer, and make the connection between the visual of the computer and the actual computer. And you'll want to repeat those steps until the student understands that that picture represents a destination. Once the child has learned the steps, then you will want to fade yourself out and, missed a step, excuse me. You'll want to fade yourself out of there, out of the picture, because the goal then is that the student will interact independently with the visual information. When you're looking at the information that you're providing to the student, you're going to be thinking about the length and the presentation. So the length, initially you'll introduce one visual, and each student is going to be different based on their individual needs. Some students will be able to take in more visual information, and others will require just that one visual and walking, or that one object and going to the destination. The goal is that your child will use the schedule independently, so just be thinking about the length there. Here's an example of one image, and then as the student is mastering that first step, you can introduce a second image. So here we have represented the first then, and adding on 3 to 4 visuals. Here we have a half-day schedule. We have the half-day schedule represented in the left to right and half-day from top to bottom. Again, that's going to depend on your student's individual skill level. So the assessment process will be ongoing. You'll work step by step with the child to see what schedule meets their needs. We start top to bottom and then move left to right with our students. Visually, it's easier for them to move from top to bottom. So once they understand that sequence, then they're able to move left to right. And then here is an example, 2 examples of the full day schedule. So similar to some examples Anna showed you, you'll see the time, the activity. You can get into greater detail with higher level students, the day, the actual date, the time, what the weather is. Here are some methods of interacting with the schedule. So once a student understands that the picture represents the destination, and they understand that they take the visual and they go to that destination, there are different ways of interacting. You can match picture to picture, as identified here, to the location, to a binder. And then when the activity is finished, you can move it to all done. You can put it in a finished box. And we also have students who check it off or click it off if they're using an electronic device. Location of the schedule is important. There are 3 locations to think about. So the adult presents the visual information to the student, and that's where you start. That's the most basic level. The second is the stationary schedule. The schedule stays in one location, as Anna had discussed earlier, the importance of that the student knows exactly where their schedule is, and they can refer back to it. The third is the child carries the schedule with them. So here that child is higher level child, higher level capabilities. They're able to carry the schedule with them, navigate different locations. Let's see. We're going to show you 3 videos, examples of the schedule. So the first video will be of an adult presenting the student with the visual, and the student will go to that location. The second is the student interacting with a stationary schedule. So our one team, they use binders because their students are more academic, functioning at more academic levels. So they have their binders and they keep them at their desks, and they will refer back to their binders with their schedules in them. The third video is an example of a student using a portable schedule. She carries it with her throughout the day, and she can refer back to it anytime she likes. So here we go.
It's time to do that.
Thanks.
What's it time for? Work. Nice job. It's time to go to the supervisor and speak. Come on, let's go. Minnie, let's go.
Oh, you know, it's 3:50. Okay, so those were our video examples. The final thing that we want to go over with you is how to prepare students for change. And what we found to be extremely helpful is practicing the preparing for change first. So it's best to practice these several planned changes. And the way that you do that will first, if you have a change card, and that could look like, and that could be represented in many different ways. For us, we have this arrow with change. So a participant earlier was talking about a white, a yellow visual that she used with the word change. So you place the change card on top of the schedule, on top or next to the regular scheduled activity, and put the replacement activity also on the visual schedule. So the student can see there's a change and here's what's going to happen in place of that activity. Initially, it's helpful to remove a non-preferred item. So say math is challenging. Well, today the change is there's no math and you get computer. So that's a really exciting change, and then the student can start to understand that that symbol or the visual representation that you choose to represent change signifies there's a change and this is what I'm doing. Start off with something that they like and take away something they don't like. The next step is changing a neutral activity to another neutral activity. So, you know, say language arts and social studies, they could take it or leave it. So today we're not having language arts, we're having social studies. And then the last step is to remove the preferred activity, such as recess, and replace it with a non-preferred activity, such as staying indoors. You know, that's still going to be a challenging interaction probably for the student because they're going to be disappointed, but they will be better prepared if you go through these steps. We are running out of time, but I just you'll see on the slides, this is some of the technology that we use to create our schedules. We use the Google Images, Picasa, Vizzle. That's our online digital resource that's ever changing and evolving. Boardmaker. There's some great apps. They're listed here, and depending on your child's visual representation level, a camera may be your best tool.
Right. Oftentimes we recommend that to families who are trying to make schedules at home. For kids who are at the photograph level of visual representation, the best and most meaningful schedule will be taking pictures of actual things in that child's environment and using those photographs. I see here also that we do not have Autismate listed, so for those of you who are asking about it, it was in your text box at the bottom of your screen. The app is called Autismate.
So we have covered a lot of ground in a short amount of time. Are there questions? We are happy to answer your questions.
Okay, so I guess. All right, so we have been asked, what if they do not understand what the object represents? Do you just keep repeating it? I think I would address that probably through sorting tasks. That's the way that we start when we're assessing a child's visual representation level here. We take a couple different types of items, sorry, not different types, but different items. So maybe a bunch of little toy bears and a bunch of little toy horses, and we work on sorting so that the child has a lot of practice with repetition and understanding that this object right here is the same as those objects right there. Then you can start to sometimes move from that object to a 3D representation and down the levels of visual representation. And I would also say that repetition is important. Sometimes it takes kids a lot of repetition before they will get it. And again, starting with something motivating, like Mandi suggested in when she was speaking about implementation, is probably the most effective way to start. So maybe just something neutral like a fork is not particularly motivating, but starting with something more preferred may be more motivating for the student.
I'm thinking about maybe the mouse for the computer, but they may not be able to manipulate the mouse. A preferred toy, so their favorite toy, taking that cause and effect toy that lights up and makes music, they get to take that to the play area if you're going to work on play skills. So starting with something motivating for sure.
Right. The next question that came up was asking about working with kids who don't really even look much at the pictures, even when paired with an object, how we can get them to attend to the picture and associate it with communication. We actually saw this question earlier, so addressed it during the presentation, and I think that a lot of the components that we talked about, such as adding, well, first of all, starting with an earlier visual representation level, like objects, may be more useful for kids who are not even looking at pictures, starting with object to object matching, or an object on a schedule. And then also adding more motivational components, color, sizing. Those are all things that you might want to try to make the kids attend better to what you're presenting from the schedule. Do you have more to add with that?
That is a good question.
I don't know if everyone is seeing this. Or the question is, how do we help children who want to remove, hide, or throw away their icons? Any suggestions? I would suggest that you may want, this may be something you've tried already, but think about whether there's a motivational component to that schedule. If it's just Boardmaker icons, maybe the kid is not interested in having you impose that schedule on them. Maybe if it's an older student who loves a certain music group, have a picture of the music group on the outside of each icon, or when the student finishes each icon, they put it on a board that has pictures of their favorite music group, and when they fill up the schedule, then they get to listen to music from that band. I think we have to be creative when we think about motivating students to use the schedule.
And why are they throwing and hiding the visuals? Is it, you'd have to determine the function of the behavior to appropriately help in that situation. And are you able to just have the schedule printed out on one laminated sheet? Does it have to be removable icons? So if you can think about why are they throwing those visuals and replacing it or teaching a different behavior, bringing in reinforcement for, these are your rules. We keep our visual icons with us, or we don't throw visual icons, and the students are getting reinforced for using their schedule in an appropriate manner. There are different layers there depending on what's going on with the student.
Are there any other questions for us to address? Excuse me. All right, so somebody is asking how to teach abstract or emotional related picture symbols. It'd be helpful if we had a little bit more detail about what exactly the symbols are, or which concepts you're trying to teach. It's always easier to start with the more concrete.
And you may want to start with a video demonstration of that emotion, depending on what you're trying to teach. If you're trying to teach emotion, having videos is, the students are attracted to the video. You're speaking again to their visual processing level. They might not be ready yet for the static image of emotions.
Any other questions that we're going to address today? And again, there may be, there will be our contact information at the end of the slides, so you will be able to contact us afterwards if there are further questions or things that we didn't address today. So it looks like that's all of our time for questions and answers.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us.